Welcome to the debate. Imagine running for office in a city that explicitly outlaws political parties in its local government.
Right?
And then, making the centerpiece of your campaign a giant logo that clearly identifies you as a Democrat.
It's definitely a bold move.
Yeah, it's exactly the paradox we are looking at right now in Lexington, Kentucky. The city operates under a legally nonpartisan charter, yet Mayor Linda Carter just sent out a campaign mailer explicitly using a national political party label to appeal to voters. And this is in her race against the two-term incumbent, Mayor Linda Gorton.
Yeah, and it really forces us to ask a fundamentally structural question, right? Should candidates in a legally nonpartisan local election use national political party affiliations at all?
Exactly. And, well, I'm taking the position today that Carter is actually providing genuine honesty and transparency here. In low-turnout local races, party affiliation serves as a highly useful and legitimate proxy for a candidate's worldview.
And I'll be arguing the exact opposite. That city-county merger charter deliberately established a nonpartisan system to force, merit-based governance. Injecting national partisan labels is just a massive distraction that obscures the true local issues at stake.
Well, let's just look at Carter's strategy not as some subversion of the system, but as an act of genuine transparency. We really have to acknowledge the reality on the ground here.
Okay, what reality is that?
The reality of the electorate. Fayette County is not a toss-up right now. It has swung for the Democratic presidential nominee in every single election cycle since 2008.
Sure, the county leans blue nationally.
Right, and Carter herself is deeply embedded in that specific political ecosystem. I mean, she was appointed to the Kentucky Real Estate Commission by Governor Andy Beshear.
Which is a very specific, highly partisan credential to lean on in a municipal race.
But a highly relevant one simply because of the political mechanics of that county. Governor Beshear has handily won Fayette County in all three of his statewide general elections. The voters there clearly trust that specific brand of leadership. So when Carter aligns herself with that brand, she is giving voters a shorthand. I like to borrow a concept from everyday life here. Imagine walking down the aisle of your local grocery store, right?
Okay.
You need to buy soup for dinner, but every single can on the shelf is completely blank. There are no brand names, no ingredients listed, just a white wrapper that says soup.
Right?
You are forced to guess what's inside. Is it chicken noodle, minestrone? By legally stripping away party labels in an election, we frequently hand our voters the political equivalent of a blank can. Carter is basically just putting the ingredient list back on the label.
I mean, I understand the appeal of that analogy, but it completely breaks down when you realize that the store in this scenario, the city of Lexington, was specifically engineered by its own residents to remove those exact labels.
Well, I don't know if I'd say engineered.
It absolutely was. The nonpartisan charter isn't just some arbitrary suggestion that candidates can opt out of when it's convenient for their polling. It is a foundational design feature of Lexington's city-county merger.
Yeah, historically that's true.
The entire architectural point of a nonpartisan system is to insulate local government from the exact kind of ideological tribalism we see at the national level.
But does it actually insulate the government, or does it just mask the tribalism? Because, look, in low-turnout local races, voter attention is a scarce resource.
True.
I tend to agree with Josh Douglas, an election law professor at UK, who points out that knowing a candidate's party affiliation is an easy proxy for voters. I mean, the cognitive science of voting tells us that people simply do not have the bandwidth to treat a mayoral race like a full-time research project.
Well,
They aren't reading 50-page white papers on municipal zoning over their morning coffee. The partisan label is a cognitive shortcut. It tells a voter broadly how Carter might approach city services or living wages, without them having to interrogate her on every granular detail.
it's a shortcut, yes, but it's a shortcut that leads the voter to the wrong destination. It changes the entire incentive structure of leadership.
How so?
When you file to run for a nonpartisan office, you are tacitly agreeing to the rules of engagement established by that city's charter. Tom Eblin, who's a 3rd District Council member in Lexington and a former managing editor of the Herald Leader, articulates this perfectly.
What does he say?
He refers to Lexington's nonpartisan system as a blessing because it forces elected officials to deal with local issues purely on their merits, rather than just defaulting to party lines.
I just don't know if I believe that local issues exist in this purely merit-based vacuum.
They do if the electorate demands it. Mayor Linda Gorton, the incumbent, is a registered Republican, but she has governed within that nonpartisan spirit. She recently called Carter's mailer disrespectful to the voters.
Disrespectful is a strong word.
But mechanically, she has a very strong point. The voters of Lexington explicitly approved a nonpartisan government. They made a collective, structural decision to reject national partisan politics at the local level. And historically, we know Lexington voters actively police this boundary.
Ah, you're thinking of the 2018 race.
Exactly. In the 2018 mayoral election, Ronnie Baston tried this exact same tactic against Gorton.
Right, the mailers.
He sent out mailers contrasting his Democratic affiliation with Gorton's GOP roots, explicitly trying to nationalize the race by asking how her Republican background would affect progressive Lexington, and it failed spectacularly.
Yeah, it didn't work.
The voters rejected the premise entirely. They essentially said, that is not how we do things here. Carter is attempting to revive a failed, divisive tactic that the charter was specifically designed to prevent.
Look, I see why you'd say that. But you are assuming the boundary between national and local politics is impermeable. The reality of modern governance is that local officials do not operate in a hermetically sealed vacuum.
I'm not saying they do, but
Carter's mailer doesn't just casually drop the word Democrat. It explicitly attacks Trump's policies and chaos in Washington. It actually features a photograph of her at a No Kings rally in downtown Lexington, standing next to a sign that says, "Uphold the Constitution."
which is fascinating political theater, but it has absolutely nothing to do with filling potholes or managing traffic flows or balancing a municipal budget.
I completely disagree. To understand the No Kings rallies, which, for context, emerged during President Trump's second term as a movement focused on checking executive power, you have to understand that these aren't just abstract federal debates.
They're pretty abstract when you're talking about city council agendas.
No, they are about fundamental civic values. And local officials in Lexington are already highly engaged in these movements. Vice Mayor Dan Wu and 4th District Council member Emma Curtis have both attended No Kings protests.
Sure, as private citizens or in their free time.
But the national climate dictates the local reality. How a mayor views civil rights, environmental protections, or labor organizing deeply informs how they manage city resources. Forcing a candidate to pretend they don't have a political ideology is essentially forcing them to obscure their actual ingredients from the voter.
I am sorry, but that logic provides an incredible cover for avoiding actual municipal responsibilities. Focusing on the Constitution and the chaos in Washington during a local mayoral race is a deliberate, calculated distraction.
A distraction?
Yes. A mayor's job is fundamentally operational. It is about logistics, public safety, basic service delivery. And ironically, Carter's own campaign rhetoric proves this exact point.
Wait, how so?
When she talks about the real issues voters are bringing up on the trail, what is the very first thing she points to? It isn't constitutional theory. It's the mayor's dismal response to the snow removal crisis from a couple of months ago.
Well, emergency response is a critical function of the mayor's office. If the incumbent failed at it, that is a legitimate critique.
It is absolutely a legitimate critique. But a snowplow is neither a Democrat nor a Republican.
I knew you were going to say that.
Because it's true. The logistics of clearing ice from a county road do not rely on your interpretation of federal executive power. Invoking national partisan outrage to talk about a local snow removal crisis is exactly the type of toxicity the charter was designed to prevent.
Okay,
It allows a candidate to avoid presenting a detailed, logical plan for municipal operations by simply waving a flag that says, "I'm on your team and I'm mad at the same people in Washington that you are." It degrades the quality of local discourse.
Let me push back on that specific cliche, because people always say there is no Democratic or Republican way to plow snow. It sounds great, but it's fundamentally untrue.
How is it untrue?
There absolutely is a partisan way to plow snow. Who gets plowed first? Does the city prioritize wealthy suburban subdivisions, or do they prioritize dense urban corridors where public transit relies on clear roads?
That's a routing issue, not a partisan one. Furthermore, how does the city clear that snow? Do they use well-paid, unionized municipal workers with robust benefits? Or do they outsource the labor to non-union private contractors to save a few tax dollars? Those are deeply ideological choices.
I mean, they're budgetary choices.
They are informed by a candidate's broader political values. So if Carter's approach to city services is rooted in a democratic worldview of equity and labor rights, giving the voter that Democrat label is actually a highly efficient way to communicate her municipal strategy.
Okay, that is a very sophisticated defense of the proxy theory. I'll give you that.
Thank you.
But we have to look at how that proxy actually functions in this specific race. Because if you understand the underlying mechanics of Lexington politics, you realize that the Democrat label isn't an efficient proxy at all. It is actively misleading. Misleading. How does it mislead the voter?
Because the fault lines in Washington are not the fault lines in Lexington. Let's look at Tom Eblin's advice again. He says that rather than looking at a national party label, voters should look at where a candidate's campaign money is coming from.
Right, follow the money.
Exactly. If you truly want a proxy for how a local candidate will govern, you follow the money. And when you do that in this mayoral race, a massive hidden local dynamic emerges that the Democrat label completely paves over.
You're referring to the donor split between the two candidates.
Precisely. We have to look at who Raquel Carter actually is in the local economy. She owns Guide Realty. She is a former board member of an advocacy group called Lexington for Everyone.
Right.
Her campaign is heavily supported by prominent realtors, developers, and construction interests. Meanwhile, Mayor Gorton is heavily supported by donors with deep ties to Lexington's legendary horse industry.
Which is the classic defining tension of Lexington politics.
It is the only tension that truly matters when it comes to the mayor's office. For those who don't know the mechanics of this, Lexington essentially invented the urban service boundary in the United States back in the late 1950s.
Yeah, they drew a hard line on the map.
Exactly. Inside the line, you can build dense housing, commercial centers, and infrastructure. Outside the line, the land is strictly protected for agriculture. Specifically, the multi-billion-dollar thoroughbred horse farms that define the region's global identity.
And there is a constant, immense pressure to expand that boundary.
Constantly, the real estate developers and groups like Lexington for Everyone argue that the boundary artificially restricts land supply, which drives up housing costs and stifles economic growth. They want to expand the boundary to build more housing and commercial space.
Right, while the horse industry fights it.
Yes, the horse industry and rural preservationists argue that expanding the boundary will destroy the agricultural landscape that makes Lexington unique. They think the city should focus on infill and density inside the existing footprint.
That is a profound local debate.
It is a profound debate about the physical future of the city. And notice what is entirely missing from that debate. Washington, D.C.
Well,
The actual debate in Lexington municipal politics isn't about the Constitution or Donald Trump. It's about urban development versus rural preservation. Slapping a Democrat label on a mailer obscures that entirely. It replaces a highly nuanced, hyperlocal conversation about land use and zoning with cheap national talking points.
But surely those two things aren't mutually exclusive.
Think about the cognitive shortcut you mentioned earlier. If a voter uses a Democrat proxy, they see that label and think they are voting for a set of abstract national values, maybe reproductive rights or federal tax policy.
Right.
But in reality, they're casting a vote in a highly specific local proxy war between real estate developers and the horse industry. The party label doesn't illuminate that dynamic. It blinds the voter to it. It tricks them into voting on national vibes when they're actually deciding the fate of the urban service boundary.
Look, I see the strength of that argument, but you are assuming that the local debate over land use and the national debate over values are completely decoupled. They really aren't.
How are they connected?
Yes, the developer versus horse industry dynamic.
Heads up, Lexington Fire is responding to a medical emergency on Queen Avenue in the 0 block. 4 units are on scene, so drivers in that area should expect possible lane restrictions. Give that area extra room and expect some delays.
It's vital, and it is highly specific to Lexington. But how a candidate navigates that exact divide is deeply informed by their ideological worldview.
But they aren't talking about their worldview on housing. They're talking about no Kings rallies.
If Carter is promising bold leadership focused on the future, as her mailer states, and she is aligning with Democratic principles, that might mean she views the housing crisis as an issue of equity. It might mean she views expanding the boundary or increasing density as a necessary step to create affordable housing for working-class families rather than just protecting the estates of wealthy horse farm owners.
Then she should make that argument. She should put the urban service boundary on her mailers, not a No Kings rally.
But she is doing both. She is establishing trust first. She is saying to a county that has voted solidly blue for nearly 2 decades, I share your foundational baseline values.
By using a label the charter outlaws.
Once that trust is established, she can then advocate for her specific vision of city services. We shouldn't ignore the fact that the mailer in question also includes an entire page dedicated to locally focused, nonpartisan language about efficient services, municipal opportunity, and infrastructure.
Which gets overshadowed by the giant Democrat logo.
She isn't ignoring the local responsibilities. She is contextualizing them within a broader moral framework. To demand that she artificially strip away her democratic identity, the very identity that informs how she views equity in housing and zoning, is to demand that she present a sanitized, incomplete version of herself to the voters.
It is only sanitized if you believe that national party platforms are the only valid way to express a moral framework. Mayor Gorton has governed effectively within that nonpartisan spirit.
She has her own conservative leanings, though.
But she understands that the mechanics of local government require consensus building that crosses party lines. When you inject the word Democrat or Republican into a local race, you immediately alienate half the room before you've even discussed the local issues.
That's just politics.
No, it fundamentally changes the criteria for leadership. Instead of the voter asking, who can best manage the budget, negotiate with developers, and coordinate emergency services, the voter is manipulated into asking, who hates the chaos in Washington as much as I do? That is a failure of local civic engagement. It's an abdication of the hard work of local politics in favor of the easy dopamine hit of national tribalism.
Well, if we zoom out from the specifics of Lexington, I think the broader structural question here is whether local government can ever truly be insulated from the national climate. I return to the practical reality of the modern voter. Yes, local issues like the urban service boundary, zoning, and municipal budgets are the lifeblood of a mayor's job. We don't dispute that.
Glad we agree on that part.
But a candidate's broader ideological framework simply cannot be surgically separated from how they execute those duties. Providing voters with a clear, honest party label is a practical tool. In a county like Fayette that consistently votes blue, Carter is utilizing a legitimate heuristic. Professor Douglas's point stands. It is an easy proxy. It is an act of transparency that gives time-strapped voters the context they need to understand her approach to governance, from how she plows the snow to how she views labor and development.
And I would counter that the nonpartisan charter exists for a profoundly important structural reason. It was designed to force candidates to run on their local track records, their specific municipal plans, and their local alliances.
Which voters rarely have time to research.
But they should. When you look beneath the national labels in this race, the true dividing line is revealed through the campaign finance data, the tension between the real estate development sector and the preservation of the horse industry. Relying on national partisan outrage to drive voter turnout is a deliberate distraction that actively obscures these vital local dynamics. A nonpartisan system requires voters and candidates to engage with the unique, complex reality of their own backyards, rather than importing the endless grievances of Washington.
It is clear we are looking at two very different philosophies of what local government is supposed to be and how voters actually process information. But I think we both agree that the debate over Cal Carter's mailer raises fascinating, unresolved questions about the nature of local elections in a hyperpolarized era.
Absolutely. And the precedent of the 2018 race, where this exact tactic failed, provides an incredible benchmark. It will be deeply interesting to see if the electorate in Lexington has shifted its view on the sanctity of the nonpartisan charter in the years since.
Yeah, have they changed?
Right.
Have the voters become so nationalized that they now demand those labels, or will they continue to actively police that boundary? There's much more to explore here, particularly if you follow Tom Eblin's advice and start tracking the actual donor dollars and land use interests behind the rhetoric. At the end of the day, it comes back to the grocery store aisle. Do you want the blank can, trusting that the strict structural rules of the supermarket guarantee a quality, unbiased product inside? Or do you demand a label and an ingredient list because you know that a generic wrapper might just be hiding an ideology you don't want to swallow? We leave it to you to decide whether the Democrat label on Carter's mailer is a useful, transparent shortcut or a fundamental violation of Lexington's nonpartisan spirit.
Thanks for joining us.
This has been The Debate. Thank you for listening.